Hello, Happy Hermit here, bringing you conversations about books, literature, and everything else under the sun. Today's selection is The Last Samurai by Helen DeWitt. One thing I'm saving for the next reading of this book is an analysis based on the Kurosawa film, The Seventh Samurai, which obviously is a huge part of this book, but is a discussion of its own. I'm thinking for the reread, I'll watch the movie then discuss the book again, but that's for another time. Also, DeWitt went through publishing hell getting this thing to print. The story could be a book itself. While she has my full sympathy in how hard she had to fight for this book, I'm not going into that either, because I think it's a distraction for what she fought for. Also, I'm giving you the standard spoiler warning. We can't have a conversation about a story and not include the full story, and also a warning about self-harm related content. It's not particularly explicit, but suicide is definitely part of the tale here. One thing about great conversations is that you don't have to get everything absolutely right. When your focus is on being right, it squelches the ways we can explore and play with subjects. The Last Samurai has sections on mathematics, linguistics, the art of piano, astrophysics, logic, and philosophy that almost nobody will have complete understanding of. That's the wonderful part of reading. I remember an interview with an educator who said that teaching Shakespeare to children was actually easier in some ways because they don't expect to understand everything. They encounter things they don't already know every single day. The sooner you can get comfortable with that, the more fun you can have with reading and learning in general. After all, if you're only reading stuff you already know, you aren't really growing much. Now to brass tacks. So first, here's the book description. Quote, 11-year-old Ludo is in search of a father. Raised single-handedly by his mother, Sibylla, Ludo's been reading Greek, Arabic, Japanese, and a little Hebrew since the age of 4. But reading Homer in the original whilst riding the Circle Line on the London Underground isn't enough to satisfy the boy's boundless curiosity. Is he a genius? A real-life child prodigy? He's grown up watching Seven Samurai on a hypnotizing loop. His mother's strategy is to give him not 1, but 7 male role models. And yet, Ludo remains obsessed with the one thing his mother refuses to tell him, his real father's name. Let loose on London, Ludo sets out on a secret quest to find the last samurai, the father he never knew. Originally published in 2000 to international acclaim, The Last Samurai is a paean to the power of language and learning, dazzling, delighting, and inspiring a legion of readers. End quote. I'm not sure what to think of this description. While technically correct, it makes the story sound a whole lot cuter than it is, and it's not really about finding the father he never knew. What Ludo is doing here is interviewing a series of father figures to find one worthy of raising him. I'll get into this more later, but it's as if Sibylla, Ludo's mother, could get him to this point in development, and he was looking for someone else, someone outside, that could help point the way further, particularly in getting on in the world. I know what the publishers are trying to sell this as, a Cinderella story where the protagonist, lost in the known obscurity, gets discovered for their specialness, where the powers that be elevate them to an exceptional position. Cinderella becomes a princess because of her beauty. In modern pop storytelling, it's the gifted actor or singer being discovered, or indeed geniuses. Think of Good Will Hunting. Will is a genius working as a janitor who solves math problems. He gets discovered, and immediately the powers that be send out a whole army of people to find ways to accommodate him and put him among the elevated folks where he belongs. In the end, he doesn't only get the whole world of opportunities, but a gifted, wealthy girlfriend who has all the connections he needs to do whatever he wants. This is peak American escapism. It is not wrong to have this fantasy, but let's call it what it is. To Western culture at large, prodigies and geniuses only matter when they're profitable. Child actors, rock stars, the 27 Club, we have hordes of prodigies in pop culture with unhappy lives who get discarded as soon as they stop making money. That's just the most public version of this story. It's no different in the private sector. On the other end of the spectrum is the idea of being gifted, which can apply to anybody. I used to work in a school, and want to know who was in the gifted classes? The ones with the pushiest parents. What does one do with a genius? DeWitt shows quite clearly that schooling is not so much interested in individual development. Here's Ludo talking about school at age 6. Quote, I said Miss Lewis told me to be a cooperative member of the class, but when I tried to help people, she said that they should do their own work. But when I tried to do my own work and take Algebra Made Easy to class, she said I should try to be more involved and be a cooperative member of the class. I said we're supposed to be working at our own speed, but whenever I try, she tells me to stop, and whenever I ask a question, she does not know the answer. She does not know anything I do not know already, so I don't think there's any point in going to school. End quote. Now, I do feel for Miss Lewis here. This classroom is clearly the wrong place for Ludo to be, but it belies a level of mediocrity that society tends to encourage. The adult geniuses here are largely in the same predicament. Sibylla, Ludo's mother, has to type magazines into a database for a living, shallow publications with titles like Sports Boat and Water Ski International, when she's clearly capable of much more. And the men that Ludo interviews later in the book frequently have similarly compromised lives. To give you a broad overview, sometimes it's best to look at the beginning of a novel and the end of it, because the simplest way to think of a story is that of a situation and an unsituation. So in the beginning of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Charlie is in a poor dead-end life with his impoverished family. That's the situation. And at the end, he's going off in an elevator with Willy Wonka, the unsituation. In The Last Samurai, the opening story, The Situation, is about Sibylla's father who, quote, skipped grades the way other boys skipped class. He lectured my grandfather's flock on carbon-14 and the origin of species, and he won a full scholarship to Harvard at the age of 15. End quote. The thing is, he was an atheist while his father was a minister, and this point gets brought up. Quote, what it meant was that my father should not reject God for secularism just because he won arguments with uneducated people. He should go to a theological college and give the other side a fair chance. If he was still of the same mind at the end, he would still only be 19, a perfectly good age to start college. End quote. Unfortunately, this screws him over because he does go to seminary, finishes the courses, but because he smokes, drinks, gambles, and is presumably still an atheist, the seminary won't pass him, thus ruining his entry into Harvard. He ends up in the hotel business instead. Through the rest of the book, Sibylla refers to the hotel business as shorthand for the compromised, comfortable, unsatisfying life. This is the situation. Now for the unsituation. The last scene has Ludo, after going through many potential fathers, approaching a world-famous pianist. He's not going there for his own direction this time. He's going there to convince this pianist to make a special CD for his mother to inspire her to reach out for a better life for herself. This is set in the 90s, so making a CD wasn't the easy thing it is now. It was a significant amount of money. Also, for context, the Samaritans was a depression hotline his mother would call. Quote, I said, what if a person called the Samaritans and they weren't very helpful? What if a person kept doing the same thing day after day? What if a person kept riding the circle line around and around? What if there was a person who thought the world would be a better place if everyone who would enjoy seeing a Tamil syllabary had access to a Tamil syllabary? What if there was a person who kept changing the subject? What if there was a person who never listened to anything anybody ever said? What if the person got off the circle line at Embankment, crossed the bridge to Waterloo, took a train to Paris, and went to work for a famous sculptor? He said, what, because of some stupid CD? What planet are you living on? I said, the premise was that there were only 5 people on the planet who would buy the CD. Obviously, most people would not get off at Embankment because of a CD, but maybe the type of person who would buy the CD would be the type of person who would. I said, the type of person who thinks boredom is a fate worse than death, the type of person who always wants things to be different, the type of person who'd rather die than read Sports Boat and Water Ski International. End quote. So we start a story where a father ruins his son's capability to live up to his potential, and end it with a son advocating for a better life for his mother. A positive reading of this is that the situation was the beginning of a curse, and the unsituation was the end of it. Sibylla is a hard person to understand because she only narrates the first half of the book, and what she's interested in talking about isn't necessarily the facts of her own life. Beyond that, she's a single mother with a dead-end job, distracted, stressed, with a history of depression and even a suicide attempt. You have to piece together her life through context. It's not written out for you. First off, let's talk about her environment, a single mother in the 80s and 90s. This is what Dan Quayle, the Vice President of the United States, said about Murphy Brown, a fictional single working mother on television. Quote, "Ultimately, however, marriage is a moral issue that requires cultural consensus and the use of social sanctions. Bearing babies irresponsibly is simply wrong. Failing to support children one has fathered is wrong, and we must be unequivocal about this. It doesn't help matters when primetime TV has Murphy Brown, a character who supposedly epitomizes today's intelligent, highly paid professional woman, mocking the importance of fathers by bearing a child alone and calling it just another lifestyle choice." End quote. Keep in mind, her just being a woman was going to make having a serious profession of any kind a challenge. Her being a single mother made it that much harder. What we know about her history is she's gifted, nearly as much as her son. She's also multilingual and has knowledge in multiple fields. She has intentionally moved away from her American family. She had, in the past, attempted suicide, got pregnant with a man she calls Liberace, more on that later, and has Ludo. She is now living in London, intentionally raising him so he has plenty of opportunities, and with as little directing as possible, because her family has a history of fumbling any kind of advancement when there's an opening. The first half of the book is Ludo seeking information on his father. Sibylla keeps this information from him, not because Liberace is an abusive man or anything like that, though she doesn't particularly like him very much, but because he's so mediocre. Here she's comparing him to Liberace the musician. Quote, "Liberace the musician had a terrible facility and a terrible sincerity. What he played with feeling, whether it was Roll Out the Barrel or I'll Be Seeing You, and in sad places a tear would well up over the mascara and drop to the silver diamante of a velvet coat, while the rings on his hands flashed up and down the keyboard, and in 1,000 mirrors he would see the tear, the mascara, the rings. He would see himself seeing the mascara, the rings, the tear. All this could be found too in Liberace the writer, the slick, buttery arpeggios, the self-regarding virtuosity as the clever, ring-laden hands sparkled over the keys, the professional sincerity which found expressiveness for the cynical and the sentimental, for the pornographic, even for alienation and affectlessness. Yet he was not really exactly like the pianist, because though he genuinely did have the emotional facility of the musician, he had only the air of technical facility. Breathless with adoration would Liberace litter his work with gaping arguments and images knocked awry, stand back, fold arms, add wood abeam at toppling tombstones and rumpled grass. Did he notice or not care? Here was a man who'd learned to write before he could think, a man who threw out logical fallacies like tacks behind a getaway car, and he always, always, always got away. End quote. The worst thing to Sibylla isn't just mediocrity, but mediocrity being treated as genius. Liberace here is someone who's published a line of tomes and articles that have nothing at all to say. They are published just to impress and nothing more. This is dangerous because it makes education nothing more than an identity. You become the learned man who creates stuff to be consumed by the public and who has a certain lifestyle and dresses a certain way and attends intellectual parties and such. The intellectualism is just his Ken doll suit, which could just as easily have been a businessman or lawyer or middle manager. One of a whole class of people who have titles, but one wonders what it is they actually do. Ludo eventually figures out who Liberace is and meets him, and is disappointed with how dull he is. The following is after Ludo reads a passage to him in Greek. Quote, "He said, 'How old are you?' I said I was 11. I said there was nothing difficult about the passage, and anyone who had studied the language for a few months would be able to read it, and I had known it for years. He said, 'Christ.' I said it was not such a big deal, and J.S. Mill had started Greek at the age of 3. He said, "How old were you when you started?" I said 4. He said, "Christ!" Then he said, "Sorry, I don't mean to make you self-conscious. It's just that I have kids of my own." I said, "What did he try to teach them?" And he said nothing in a formal way. But the point was that they had watched Sesame Street, and it was the right level. End quote. The comment of Sesame Street being the right level gets repeated throughout the whole book as a sort of mantra representing a desire for conformity over excellence. The right level is one where you are what's expected of you, because that way people don't have to think so much. Ludo, though, chooses not to let Liberace know he's his father and goes on a quest for a possible replacement. He goes through several. I'm going to list them real quick, referring them mostly by their nicknames. All these are considered the top of their respective fields. There's the linguist adventurer, known for his exotic pursuits of rare languages. Ludo rejects him because he's a selfish, violent monster who believes in making things harder on other people to build character. There's the celebrity astronomer. He has an educational science show. This man makes his children do homework to prove that they're worthy to sit at the same table with him at dinner. Ludo rejects him because he's dishonest and scheming. Fame has corrupted him. There's the painter. Fame has made him crazy. He cuts Ludo in order to make a new piece of art out of his blood. Completely unstable, and it's questionable whether his art has any meaning or quality to it anymore. There's the gambler. Funnily enough, the only truly happy one in this lot, but he doesn't have anything to teach Ludo other than card games. Has completely surrendered himself to chance. And there's Red Devlin, an expert communicator who has done much good with negotiating both internationally and domestically. He's just been released from being imprisoned, which has broken him, feels completely disconnected from the world, commits suicide. None of these are able to help Ludo, so his final visit was to the pianist. Rather than seeking guidance for himself, Ludo is now reaching out to improve his mother's situation. He realizes he doesn't need a father, and that none of these people have the answers he's seeking. He has to figure it out for himself. The point here is that wherever you start, if you ever get to a place where you think you know it all, that you're done, you're basically signing yourself up for misery. I'm reminded of this quote by Maya Angelou. Education is a process that goes on till death. The moment you see someone who knows she has found the one true way and can tell all the others false, then you know you are in the company of an ignoramus. Worse than that, you end up sinking into mediocrity, a hellish sort of life. Sibylla runs into this at one point in the supermarket. Quote, "She came down the aisle, and Sibylla stopped and stood by the cart, motionless as the boxes of cornflakes on their shelves. Her eyes were like black coals, and her skin like pale, dirty, thick clay. From her absolute silence, from her black, staring eyes, I knew this mild, fat woman was someone she had hoped to never see again. The cart, and the woman, and the children came forward, and suddenly the woman's eyes shifted from the boxes of cereal, and across the mildness spread a look of pleased surprise. 'Sybil,' she exclaimed, 'is it really you?' Sib stared at her dumbly. 'It's me,' said the woman. 'I suppose I've changed a lot,' she added, grimacing comically. 'Kids,' she added. 'What's your little boy's name?' asked the woman. 'His name is Stephen,' said Sib after a moment's hesitation. 'He looks very bright,' said the woman. 'No, Felicity, no, Mickey, what did I just say?' 'He is capable of logical thought,' said Sib. 'It makes him appear exceptionally intelligent. The fact is that most people are illogical out of habit rather than stupidity. They could probably be rational quite easily if properly taught.' 'So it all worked out for the best,' said the woman. 'You know, however bad things look, something good may just be around the corner.' Sib looked at her with terrible pity, as if wondering what death could be worse than the life which had led her to this cardboard canyon of cornflakes. She said to me in a low voice, 'Buy them some chocolate,' said Sib, digging into her bag and giving me a pound. 'Buy them all some chocolate. Take them all away.' I led them away down the aisle. As we turned the corner, I saw Sib put an arm around one fat, shaking shoulder. Now it was the fat woman who wept on a fat fist. End quote. The woman was part of a highly intellectual crowd that included Sibylla before she had Ludo, and we later find out that this woman was who stopped Sibylla from committing suicide. We're not told this directly, but she probably was another promising young woman who ended up being a housewife. Now, neither I nor this book are making claims against motherhood, but in the context of this book, it's just another way people get shoved into some role and are unable to live up to their potential, rotting away in some persona they're trapped inside. The thing with Sibylla is, she makes plenty of sacrifices, some of them heartbreaking, but she never completely gives up on herself. That's why early on, when she goes to see the pianist's concert, she was enjoying something of high quality for its own sake and for her own sake. I do worry a bit that Sibylla would find me to be yet another pseudo-intellectual, but this book really focuses on the importance of raw learning, not because it's useful, not because it impresses others, and not because it's good for us, but because it's a part of what makes us human. I think of this quote from Dead Poets Society. Quote, "We don't read and write poetry because it's cute. We read and write poetry because we are members of the human race, and the human race is filled with passion. Medicine, law, business, engineering, these are noble pursuits and necessary to sustain life. But poetry, beauty, romance, love, these are what we stay alive for." End quote. Learning is its own pursuit, and the truest of learning would go through languages and math and philosophy and physics. It would break the boundaries on them into a world of delicious beauty, because the glory of learning is that it doesn't end. This is going to sound like a cliche, but if you really try to understand the world, your life is so much better. This is why Sibylla loves The Seven Samurai. Essentially, the film is about the importance of rational thought. Sibylla says it best here, quote, "We should draw our conclusions from the evidence available rather than from hearsay, and try not to be influenced by our preconceptions. We should strive to see what we can see for ourselves, rather than what we would like to see." End quote. I would emphasize from the evidence available, meaning through direct observation. Hearsay these days can be on the news or something you found somewhere on the internet. People tend to copy what the people around them think rather than figuring things out for real. Alexander Pope said it more than 300 years ago. FYI, Pierian here means having to do with the muses, aka the knowledge brought from the humanities. Quote, "A little learning is a dangerous thing. Drink deep, or taste not the Pierian spring. Their shallow draughts intoxicate the brain, and drinking largely sobers us again. Fired at first sight with what the muse imparts, in fearless youth we tempt the heights of arts, while from the bounded level of our mind short views we take, nor see the lengths behind, but more advanced behold with strange surprise new distant scenes of endless science rise." End quote. To close, this book happens to have one of the best food scenes when having breakfast with the gambler. Quote, "About 3 dozen eggs had been scrambled, boiled, poached, fried, benedicted, omeletted, and whatever else you can do with an egg, and then placed on silver chafing dishes to keep warm. 20 or 30 pastries had been arranged in a tasteful mountain in a basket. 3 pale green melons had been hollowed out, the edges scalloped, and the halves filled with fruit carved into crescent moons and stars. There was another big basket of fruit au naturel, most of it the kinds we never bought at Tesco's because they were 99p a shot. There was a revolving silver stand with 2 kinds of mustard, 3 kinds of chutney, 5 kinds of honey, and 12 kinds of jam. There were crepes with 7 different fillings. There was smoked salmon, and something that I thought might be a kipper. There were glass pitchers with freshly squeezed orange, pineapple, tomato, guava, and mango juice. There was silver pots of coffee, tea, and hot chocolate, and a silver bowl of whipped cream for the hot chocolate." End quote. While that is an enormous amount of food for just 2 people, the meal sounds like absolute heaven. Just give me a Bloody Mary and I'm there. Well, this is the Happy Hermit signing off for today. I hope you have a marvelous day, and happy reading!